various submissions is dealing with the more practical question of how is the sacrament administered to children in a way which is safe and avoids any risk of what can otherwise be a quite intimate environment. The response indicates that practices seem to vary quite widely. There's a degree of varying degrees of attention to, for instance, maintaining open line of sight or doing this in an open part of the church. In some places it seems it's done behind doors, but doors with a glass panel. If there was thought to be a need for a uniform standard in that regard, what would be the way of achieving it?
The way of achieving it would be, and it would have to be, I imagine, there would have to be, one would want some discussion by the Bishops' Conference. Okay, we've heard the Commission, here are the results, here are the recommendations. What now are we going to do? And then something has to be done. It can't just sink below the waves as though nothing has happened. That would be the worst possible thing ever.
Thank you. Professor Waters, just to return to something we touched on right at the start, and this was a suggestion, I think, that emerged from something the Bishop had said, that if someone presents for what has the appearance of a confession, but does so with no honest intention or contrition to seek a sincere confession and reconciliation, is it accepted generally as a matter of canon law and theology that the priest is entitled to form a judgment that that's not a true sacrament and therefore the seal doesn't apply?
I believe he would. You may have seen the film Calvary a few years ago, set in Ireland, and it started in a Hollywood-style hearing of a confession where a man came in and made threats to the priest about what he was going to do and the next scene showed that confessor discussing this with his bishop. Now, a number of my parishioners, in discussing this with me, said he was breaking the seal of the confession. So there's this naive, childish thing that anything said within the confessional room is bound by the seal. The Church has never taught that, but that's the naive, inaccurate perception of many. That needs to be made quite clear, that it's only the administration of the sacrament where the seal applies, and it applies only to the sins of the penitent. Now, there's some people could go into a confessional using it as a safe counselling room. So, for example, if a child came into me and started saying, without making any attempt to make a confession, but had been told by an adult, if you go and see the priest there, he will never reveal anything. So that I think my job is to counsel him to go and tell a responsible adult, or even offer myself to take him to the responsible adult, and tell him also that this has nothing to do with the seal, because you haven't come to me to confess your sins. You've come to me to tell me about someone else's sins. And that's never been under the seal. Now, that's a widely held misconception that... And unfortunately, these days, the only image we ever get of confession is what we see in Hollywood films, or not even films, what do you call them? Serials and so on. Neighbours or something.
Not television documentaries.
Not serious documentaries, no.
Your Honour, I have no further questions, but I'm conscious that I may have overlooked anyone who might have had any outstanding points. Do any of you have any further contributions you wish to make?
If I may, really quickly, I think one of the problems or the issues that you're facing is how do you go about reconciling all of this that has happened in Australia to both the Catholic people in the parishes who have been victimised by it, to the victims themselves, and then wider to the people of Australia. what restorative justice processes are you putting in place and considering? So I did bring one, which is a Samoan one, and I won't bore you with it. It's called Ifoga, I-F-O-G-A. So there are examples around the Pacific, there may even be for the Indigenous First Nations of Australia, some process that you can use whereby the church is taken by the Commission or by the people of Australia through this process of contrition, confession, satisfaction and absolution. So I think those are important. The second thing...
Some might call that a royal commission. Some might call that a royal commission.
Yeah, exactly. I think you are acting as you previously said, as confessor to the Catholic Church, and you're in the process of influencing the theological perception that the Church has of itself and its weaknesses around the way that it has dealt with its own theology, with its own gospel. The other thing I would say is that from a liturgical point of view, to protect children, it is possible and it's not unreasonable to require of the Catholic Church in New Zealand that the preparation of the Sacrament of Reconciliation is moved until a period after the children have received baptism, confirmation or chrismation and Eucharist, whenever that may be. So that could be a requirement of the teenage years.
Father,
I'll leave it there.
It's important for us all to constantly bear in mind that we're a royal commission into many organisations, not just the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I understand and appreciate, but I do see what you're doing. Thank you.
Can I just clarify one thing with you, Father Brendan? It goes back to the issue of the child or young person in the inside the confessional, to use the generic language. Now, as I understand it, what you say is that the child who is making a disclosure rather than a confession is not a penitent in the model inside your church, and therefore not covered by the seal of the confessional. What I'm just not clear about is, therefore, what you and not only you, but your expectations of what the confessor would do in the circumstances where such a disclosure is made.
So 8-year-old Sally presents and says, I stole jelly beans and Daddy did something naughty to me. I am not at liberty to disclose to anyone that Sally stole the jelly beans. But in terms of what she has said about what Daddy did, I regard myself as being in exactly the same position as if she was outside the confessional. Now, what I would do, as I say, given the work I do and my travel habits, I don't imagine I will have a relationship with Sally. But Sally may be in a local school or a local parish, and so I would see it as my obligation to make contact with the authorities in that area to ensure that something is done to investigate what was meant by Sally saying, Daddy did something naughty.
So effectively you would feel yourself obliged to make a notification to the appropriate child protection authority or police?
Yes, I'm saying it's subject to this. In terms of to the appropriate child protection authority, it may be that given if Sally has come in and only presented at confession, and I've never met Sally before and never likely to again, I think what I would find more appropriate is like to go to the school principal or the parish priest or contact someone in the diocesan office to say we now have to action this to the Child Protection Authority.
So does it then follow from what you've said that that you would not have a theological or doctrinal objection to the confessor being mandated?
No. Sure.
In those circumstances, with respect to a disclosure by a child or young person in the seal of the confessional.
That's right. In that, I'm saying that it's not matter which is relevant to the seal of confession in the first place. So that what might be mandated to me, as an adult person receiving that information, I say can be applied indiscriminatorily, whether I'm sitting in a confessional box or in Pitt Street.
Can I just ask this question about on that, just on that seal? Is there uniformity of view as to where the seal applies? I don't want the answer what it is, but is there now a uniform position in the Catholic Church in Australia as to what the seal of confession actually covers? Is that not contentious? In other words, in the submissions you've made to us, are we as the Royal Commission able to fully understand and appreciate the clear position of what the seal of confession covers for our consideration?
Could I suggest the appropriate course would to have Bishop Terry's committee of the Bishops' Conference put in a particular submission to you articulating what is the received theological view of the Catholic Church in Australia on the seal of the confessional?
Will we get one view?
Yes, you would.
Okay.
Would.
That's the advantage of a hierarchy, Your Honour.
Just so I'm clear, and thank you for being patient with me in this regard, because it might be self-evident, but in that scenario that you just explained to Judge Cope, say that Sally does not come to you at all, but Sally's father comes to you and confesses that Sally has been sexually abused by him, and that abuse is occurring every weekend when he has access to that child. Now, my understanding, particularly what Father Waters said, is that a likely scenario there is that you may say to Sally's father, before you can receive absolution, you have to confess to the authorities. But if, and using Father Waters' hypothetical, you say, come back and see me in 2 weeks' time, and if you confess to the authorities, I'll consider absolution. And if Sally's father doesn't come back, then you will not report to the authorities. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct. Okay.
And if the
abuse of Sally will continue.
Yes.
Most likely.
Yes.
Thank you.
In much the same way, with deep regret, as with legal professional privilege, for example.
Well, look, that's another area of debate, isn't it? I mean, that has been opened up now for school teachers and doctors. And the comment was made earlier, I think that people might be reluctant to go to confession, but there are professionals today who are required to report. Okay, thank you.
Mr Gray, have we excited any thoughts in you?
I have no questions yet.
No questions. Does anyone else wish to say anything before I thank you? Very well. Well, then can I thank all of you? I don't think we want any of you again, is that right?
I'll be excused, John.
I can all say that you're formally excused, but I